Welcome to episode 5 of Coral's Soapbox. Good morning, Coral.
Good morning, Matt, and good morning, everyone who is crazy enough to still keep watching us.
They still are.
Get a life, people. Get a life. Gee, I know Matt looks a bit spunky with this very 70s Starsky and Hutch type.
We create some heated debate with the comments on YouTube. It's funny.
We do, and that's good. I mean, it's great that they have an opinion on things. It's not always going to be my opinion, but it's great that people have opinions on things even after all this time.
Now, we do discuss news of the day, and we will quickly discuss something. Obviously, the biggest news that we've ever seen in the world, and our lifetimes probably, is the Queen passing.
I'm like you, but probably even more so. I remember Queen Elizabeth II's coronation.
Oh, wow. Yep.
The old king dying in 1952. I was 7, not quite 8 years old at the time. And I remember clearly the grief and the mourning period. But more than that, I remember the coronation. And it only occurred to me recently that I was given, as a remembrance of the coronation, a silver memorial 5-shilling piece, which was in a presentation box. And I thought, what the hell did I ever do with that? Because it's probably worth real money now. But look, she lived 96 years. It was an exemplary life, well lived. Whether you support the monarchy or not, are you a monarchist, Matt, or not?
I'm either way. I respect the royal family. I thought Princess.
Well, I think if for no other reason, all Brits should be monarchists, because the monarchy and Stonehenge are the two greatest tourist attractions that they have. Most people who go to Britain, they hope to see a member of the royal family, or they want to see Buckingham Palace. So imagine if Britain became a republic and there was no royalty for them to see. They'd be stuck just seeing Stonehenge, and they'd be bored to tears, quite frankly, because all of London is built around there being a monarchy. The Tower of London is all the people, the monarchs who were imprisoned there or beheaded there. Queen Elizabeth II has been an absolutely exemplary example of how to lead a good life of service. And a lot of people like Donald Trump, for example, don't realize that in order to truly lead, you have to serve. You have to be serving the people in order to lead them. And she's been absolutely remarkable in that situation. And, she's now, if you believe in an afterlife of any form, then she's now with the man she loved for 72 years or so. And you can't live a better life than that. So I'm not saddened by it. I'm saddened to realize that I'm old enough to remember when she was crowned. But I'm not saddened by it, because I think it's just part of the passing of time. And she was 96. I'm not saddened in the way even that I was saddened by Princess Diana, because she was a young woman and she had so much of her life ahead of her. And that seemed a far bigger tragedy to me, that she should die at such a young age. But the Queen's had a long, long life. And she's been an exemplary monarch, and it's going to be interesting to see what the next few years bring. I'm actually a fan of Prince Charles, because he bucked the system and he believed in climate change when it wasn't politically correct to do so, and he spoke out about ugly architecture when it wasn't politically correct to do so. And I'm quite saddened that the poor bugger now is not going to be allowed to say anything about anything much, because he's the king. You've just got to be diplomatic. So.
One thing I have noticed over all the coverage, we've been having all the news on Foxtel playing.
Yeah.
One thing I have noticed that's really interesting is that the crowds that are lining up to pay their respects, they're lining up 30 hours, 8 kilometers long, and not one of them complained. they're all so happy just to be there to pay their respects. No
Well,
complaints whatsoever.
and I mean, if it's a once in a lifetime thing, if you're told something is a once in a lifetime thing, well, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, you wouldn't complain about. Well, I don't know. Maybe you would, but I certainly wouldn't
30
complain
hours
about.
is a long time to wait.
I've
in a line.
seen people queue longer than that for grand final tickets, mate. Or, you know, there were kids who queued for 5 days for tickets to a Justin Bieber concert. You're going to equate Justin Bieber with the Queen of England. I mean, I don't think it's that big a deal. I'm surprised that there were so many of them, but I'm not surprised that you know, that the people did it. I would do it if I'd been in London. I would queue up.
Yeah.
I would queue for that time. Mind you, I'd be popping into the nearest hotel to sleep overnight. I wouldn't be on the pavement or in a tent, but you know, I would queue up for it.
And do you think, before we get into it, do you think Australia should become a republic, or we just stay as we are?
I think we can become a republic but remain a member of the Commonwealth. I mean, half the Commonwealth countries have presidents. So we could have a president, but we could still be a member of the Commonwealth. And the Queen is the head, well, the King now is the head of the Commonwealth. So there's no reason why we can't stay in the Commonwealth and have some ties to Britain, because although they are saying now that 51% of Australia's population is of Asian origin, and I think we'd have far more people complain if it was suggested that we should come under the auspices of China or India, all of which there is a larger population than there is of English people here. You know, we've got more Europeans than we have English people here. So should the Queen be our head? Probably not. But then again, if you have an elected president, you run the risk of seeing, excuse the expression, the shit fight that you have in the United States, for example. And nobody wants that. So, you know.
How do you think it would work here how do you think it would work here in Parliament, having a president that just serves 4 years and then is re-elected for another 4 years, and then that's it? Like here, you could have a prime minister sit for 15 years if they're voted for it.
Yeah. I understand their rationale, but I think it's too short a time. And I think it depends on the president, you know. I mean, the president should be just basically a titular situation. And in point of fact, you don't seem, one of the reasons why poor Obama didn't get much done was because there were majorities of the other side, Republicans, in the Senate and in the House. So, you know, the president only has so much power, but then you get someone like Trump who basically wants to turn the presidency into a dictatorship. And I think that's the worry. But then again, I don't think democracy works. It just works better than the alternatives.
And he'll be back. He'll be back. I'm
Trump?
not a fan of him, but he'll be back, yeah.
Oh, God. If he's not in prison, I mean, I'd like to see him in prison. But I'd like to. I actually said to my doctor recently, who is also a Trump hater like me. Well, I'm not a Trump hater. I just think the man is dangerous and toxic. Yeah. I said, if you ever diagnose me with a terminal disease, I'm going to get a gun from somewhere and fly over there, barge my way into Mar-a-Lago and empty it into him. I actually had an idea for a film in which Hillary Clinton was diagnosed with a yeah. This is when he first got elected. Hillary Clinton's diagnosed with a terminal disease. She gets a gun and she goes and shoots Trump. So, yes, it's a strange world where I have to say, the Queen's dying put completely on hold the anniversary of 9/11. I mean, we saw virtually nothing about 9/11 because it was all the Queen's death and the lying in state and everything. And even the American, because I have CNN on a lot, even the American channels covered the Queen's death rather than covering the anniversary of 9/11.
Actually,
So,
I've watched every documentary. I've read every book about 9/11. I'm just really interested in that. What they had on Foxtel the other night was they played, the public had never heard it, they played all the tapes from relatives, from people that died, all the phone messages.
yeah.
That was really sad, listening to people.
I'm a huge fan of Jon Stewart, and Jon Stewart has sort of taken it on himself to represent the survivors of 9/11 because they're not getting the health benefits, etc., that they should be getting.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those firemen have ended up just, their health is completely shot.
Yeah.
And they're being forgotten. They put their lives on the line and they're being completely forgotten. I mean, it's very strange. There's a whole, well, the majority of the population of America seems to take the view of, oh, I'll pray for you.
Yeah.
Well, pray can only do so much. Get off your bums and actually do something solid and positive and concrete to help the people who need help. I'm not sure praying for them is going to cut it, quite frankly.
No, I'll send you the details of this show. It was just, the wife or one of the husbands saved the voicemail message onto a disc. Like she saved so many copies of it just so she could listen to it every day. And just, knowing that, you could be on the 103rd floor and there's nowhere to go except you could jump.
I was watching television when it happened. I was watching television when it happened. I turned on the television and I thought, oh, what channel am I on? Because I saw the first plane hit the buildings and I thought, what channel am I on? And then my phone went and it was my daughter. And she said, oh my God, are you watching this? Are you watching this? I said, yeah, what is it? She said, it's live. It's live. It's the news. And I was just in shock, in complete and utter shock. And I just stayed with it on and watched it all through because I was in Perth at the time and it was all through the night. So I watched it all through the night.
It's one of those moments we all know where we were, like when Princess died.
Yeah, I know where I was when I heard that JFK was dead. I know where I was when I heard the Queen had died, and I know where I was when 9/11 happened.
But do you know where you were when B. Smith died in the Barnhurst fire?
Oh, probably rubbing my hands together and saying, at last we can move on. And let me say that I saw for fans of, and I know there are loads here, but not so many in the UK. For fans of Blue Heelers, I had a chance to catch up with Lisa McCune last week.
Saw that. And
give her big hugs. And she didn't speak to me for 2 years after I killed her on Blue Heelers. And she was arguably more popular in Australia than B. Smith was in Prisoner. Blue Heelers didn't have the international life that Prisoner had, but it was the top rating show here for 9 years, and she won 5 Gold Logie Awards, I think.
Oh, it's 5. Wow.
And the right thing to do was to kill that character. The show could not have survived if we had just had her go off with someone. Everybody would have been waiting for someone to ask, oh, and how's Maggie doing? And, oh, I had a letter from Maggie the other day. Everyone would have been waiting for her to come back. And she had made it clear that she was never going to come back, never. But she did not want to be killed. And she didn't speak to me for 2 years. And, she has finally now said it was the right decision. But, sometimes in order for a show to move on, it isn't enough for someone just to leave the show. You have to kill that character so that there can be no doubt that the show is entering another era. You know, no one can say, oh, well, it's just doing that until B comes back, or they're just doing that until Maggie comes back. You know, it's a very clear defining moment of saying that's finished. And if you want to stop watching now, that's your right to stop watching now. But that is finished. That part of the show is over and done, and we're into something new now. And, you know, a lot of people found that hard to deal with. A lot of people said, oh, I never, you know, I only like the B. Smith era. I never watched it after that. Well, if you never watched it after that, how do you know?
Can I say something on that? And someone will have a go at me for this. I don't believe that. I see people write, I stopped watching after Vera left. I stopped watching after this. Nah, I reckon everyone watched the whole lot. They are just bullshitting. You can't say you've watched the whole lot. I don't believe that.
Well, you might not believe that, Matt, but I'm here to tell you I didn't watch an episode after 585.
Yeah, but you're behind the scenes. I'm talking about fans.
But I still watched the show. I'm still a fan of the show. That's why I wanted to write for it so badly. But I mean, I had different reasons, of course. It was you know, it was emotionally traumatic for me to, I couldn't. I mean, I could now, but now it's so far down the track. What I don't get or understand is the people who watch all 692 episodes and then start again at episode 1. And they've maybe watched the whole series 5, 10, 15 times. Now, you know, that goes...
A fan sent me a message, said he's on his 23rd run.
Well, we have to remember that the word fan is a shortened version of fanatic.
Yes,
that's where the word fan comes from, and I think fanaticism of any kind is dangerous. I think there are people who are so completely tied up in any television show. I mean, there are people who are like that about Breaking Bad or Sons of Anarchy or things like that. But I mean, someone posted recently on a prisoner's site, because there was a picture of Anne Phelan and Maggie Fitzpatrick, not on set, but outside, you know, after they'd left the show together, and said, isn't it nice to see Myra and Joan as friends? And I had to answer, Myra and Joan weren't friends.
Yes,
Maggie Fitzpatrick and Anne Phelan were friends, but Myra and Joan were not friends. When you literally cannot tell the difference between the actor and the character, you really, that's the time when you should start to look at yourself and say, hang on a minute, I've crossed a line here. There was a show here called Bellbird that you might remember. And in it, and this is I've not seen this connection mentioned anywhere, but in that particular show, a very young Anne Phelan was married to a very young Ian Smith.
Oh, yes.
Who played the policeman. And she, I can't remember the characters' names, she was meant to be pregnant, and later she had a miscarriage. But when the episodes saying that she was pregnant went to air, Annie Phelan was inundated with baby clothes, presents of baby clothes from fans, real baby clothes. With notes saying, I know this won't fit the baby for a while, but I got it in a bigger size because I figure everybody would be sending newborn sizes. Well, there was no baby, folks. It's drama. And drama is heightened reality, or should be. But we have to remember that it is still drama. It's not real. The writers have to believe it real. Here's the contradiction. The writers, in order to write it honestly and truthfully, have to believe those characters are real. Because we have to say, or we should say, a lot of writers don't, but we should say, What's the character going to do in this circumstance? Not what do I want them to do, but what's the character going to do in this circumstance? And that will bring us to what we're talking about today, good stories, bad stories. For example, if someone like Pixie was raped, she would lose her mind. She would be so traumatized, she would lose her mind.
Well, that leads me into what we are going to talk about. What makes a good story good or bad?
What's a good or a bad story? Well, I would say, for a start, that any story you remember 40 years later is a good story. Because if it was a bad story, if it was, you'd have forgotten it and moved on and you wouldn't remember it. Now, that doesn't mean that all good stories are well realized or well executed. You can have a bad story that is well executed, but it's still a bad story. You can't ever make a bad story a good story, but you can, if it's badly executed, make a good story into a bad story. So I would say, let's take for an example, a story which was a good story, but it's on everybody's list. And I looked again at your page, at your Talking Prisoner page, Matt, and almost everybody has said that was absolutely the worst story ever. Guess which one I'm talking about?
The male prisoner coming in as a female.
The male prisoner. Okay. Was that a good story? Yeah, it was a bloody great story. Was it a hot mess when it went to air? Oh, yes, it was a proper shit when it went to air. So how did a good story become a really terrible story? Well, let me ask you and everyone out there, think about that story for a minute and think about if that person that came in was Frankie Doyle. And then later on in the story, you discovered Frankie Doyle was actually a man who had come in to be with a girlfriend, with his girlfriend. You would have gone, oh my God, I thought it was a woman. I really believed it was a woman. So what was wrong with that story was not that it was a bad story. It was a great story. And had it been an actress like Carol Burns, and the disclosure had been that she was a man, and she could easily have done it, everybody will be saying, what a great story. We didn't pick it for a minute. The problem was not the story. The problem was the casting. The casting was absolute rubbish. Michael Cormack is a very noted musical theatre actor here in Australia. Absolutely brilliant, with the most superb voice you'd ever want to hear. But he looked like a bloke. All makeup in the world didn't make him look like a girl. But if you think about it and you imagine someone who looked like a girl but wasn't, that was a good story. It was a crap story because of the execution, not because of the writing. Can you imagine somebody walking in, if we'd had a scene, for example, where, and I'm only saying Carol Burns and Frankie Doyle because she could have pulled it off, but there are any number of people who could have pulled it off. Leslie Baker could have pulled it off. There are androgynous looking females who mostly tend to play lesbians. Maggie Kay could have pulled it off. She's tall enough to be a man. And, if we'd had a scene where one of the screws had gone into the showers and she had turned around, and all the screw would have to have done is and realized that she had a dick and balls.
But I think that's where it always brings a story undone, is, in every jail in the world that the first thing is a strip search, and
not if you're on remand. And that somebody actually said that and said, oh, that's the mistake they made. No, at the time when Prisoner was made, you were not put in uniform. You were not strip searched or cavity checked if you were on remand, because if you were on remand, you were still considered innocent.
Yeah.
And they were purposely on remand. Maybe that's something that the English fans don't realize. And I have explained it elsewhere. They were on remand. So they didn't get cavity searched. They didn't get strip searched. They weren't in uniforms. They were on remand.
Yeah.
They were waiting to go to trial. And so that plays perfectly legitimately. The only time you would have found out is if you had seen him naked in a shower, or somewhere like that.
So did you get told when they cast for that part?
At that stage, I didn't have any say in casting. It ended for us once the stories were created and the scripts, the storylines went out to the writers. We didn't even get to see the first draft scripts at that stage. Okay. And one of the things which is a big difference in the writing fraternity now is because they have showrunners, and because the showrunner or script producer, because we call them script producers, get to do what's called the last pass on the script. So they get to see the script after the edit is done, and they get to put back anything that's been cut out by mistake, because it's important to a story that's upcoming, but the editors don't know that. And that was initiated by me throwing one of my world famous tantrums. You know, I mean, it was just, pardon?
Did you have tantrums?
Oh God, yes. Oh God, yes. Absolutely. I threw tantrums regularly. And interestingly, I was speaking to Peter Pinney quite recently, and Peter Pinney was one of the heads of Grundy's, of course. And he, I think I've said in a previous one, he used to call me that woman because I was so freaking difficult, and I would just say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not doing it. Sorry, I'm not doing it. But if you give me a couple of days, I'll come up with a story that actually works. Yeah. And usually they gave me that chance. But at one stage, there was a period somewhere in the late 400s, early 500s, not across that bridge, because I know I was there then, where I actually quit. Lex Van Os was producing, and I, for about the 5th time that year, said, that's it, I'm out of here, I quit, fuck you all, I'm going. And he called my bluff, and they actually bought me a going away present and held me a going away party, and I'm in tears. And he obviously was going to teach me a lesson, and I had to leave because I'd done that, and they brought in 2 people to replace me. One of them was one of our regular writers, Ray Colley, and the other one was Tria Smallacombe's auntie, Betty Quinn. Oh. And the 2 of them together formed what we called a monster called the Colloquins. We took their 2 names and we said, oh, and everybody in the show said, oh, the Colloquin is at the helm. I wasn't there, I was home, you know, crying and saying, you stupid cow, to myself. But the Colloquin did create some fairly awful stories, because they were of an old school that believed that the producers, they were paying their wages, so they got the last say. And I remember Ray Colley saying to me, why do you make things so hard for yourself? Why do you fight with them? And why do you say, I'm not going to do that? And I say, because I want to be able to say, well, at least I told my truth, not someone else's stuff that was totally crap. I'm not going to knowingly write crap. And I promise viewers that you may think lots of my stories are crap, but I never wrote them thinking they were rubbish. Never. I never thought, oh, well, we just need to fill in 20 minutes here, so let's have cockroach racing. You know, that was never an idea to do. It was never a major story anyway. It was what we call light relief. Yeah. It was so, and there's another story that is on people's list of worst stories. how can you have cockroach races? Well, very big in the time, at that time in Australia, were such things as frog races,
Yeah.
crab races, rat races, wet t-shirt competitions, dwarf throwing competition. All of these were huge during the 80s. Now we have in Australia, which English people will probably go, because I remember they had them when I was in my teens. We went on holiday to Italy and they had them there. And I can remember my feet crunching on them, walking on them. The big American flying cockroaches. Now they're probably anywhere between 1 and 2 inches long. So they're 2.5 to 5 centimeters long. And we had them in Australia, and we had them at the time we were doing Prisoner. We had one summer where we had an absolute plague of them. Wow. And I thought that the prison's going to be overrun with these huge cockroaches, and they can fly, but they don't. They prefer to scurry. And so the idea was, okay, in the tradition of frog racing, they couldn't get hold of that many frogs. They've got no dwarfs to throw. To pass the time, because they were bored, let's race the cockroaches. Let's catch the cockroaches and race the cockroaches. Now, they were meant to be these 2-inch long cockroaches, and they were meant to mark the backs of them with soap or a bit of paint or anything that they could find, nail polish, dye, anything that they could find, so that they could recognize their own cockroach. Again, when the story went to air, they were these little tiny German breeding cockroaches, which the whole thing was just silly because you could barely see them. There's nothing wrong with the story.
No, the story's good. And
the idea of the women betting on whose cockroach was going to win, nothing wrong with that story at all. And I still stand by that, even though it is one of the most mentioned worst stories ever.
Well, I don't know why, because, back in the days of the 50s and 60s in prisons, when a person was in solitary, to pass time, they would rip a button off their shirt, throw it up in the air, and then look for it. That was their day. Pass time. So a cockroach race makes sense to me.
Well, it made sense to me, but again, it was wrongly directed. It was wrongly executed. If it had been executed the way we wrote it, it would have been a perfectly valid story. Now I want to talk, because amongst a lot of people say amongst their worst endings ever is, and you'll find, what are you going to say?
Well, are you talking about Pixie's
ending? I'm talking about Pixie's
exit.
Okay,
so we've taken all the comments from the Facebook page from people's best and worst stories. So
I read all the comments. I reread all the comments, and I thought, okay, if you want to name some of the people who put it down, but they know who they are.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Barry Parker said the worst for me was Pixie's exit. And he said he spoke to Judy about it, and she said that she begged for a happy ending for Pixie.
Well, he apparently didn't speak to Judy about it, and the scripts were already written long before Judy ever saw them. I mean, Judy McBurney says it was her doing that Pixie wore pink. Bullshit. Pink has always been my favorite color. And I wrote in the character breakdown that Pixie is obsessed with pink. She had a pink wedding dress for one of her weddings. She decorates her cell in pink. With the best will in the world, actors and actresses, and I have a lot of respect for some of them, not so much for others, actors and actresses read scripts. Some of them, and they learn their lines and they say their lines. Some of them actually are smart enough to say, why am I doing this again? Why is she feeling this way? And they look for motivation. Others don't. but none of them get to say, I think my character likes pink, and so can you give me pink so-and-sos? Or, you know, I beg for this, you know, I mean, certainly Lisa McCune begged me not to kill Maggie. She begged, and her agent said she'll take any exit other than Maggie being killed.
Also, even her agent got involved with that.
Even her agent got involved.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's one of the reasons why I was fired from Blue Healers, because when it realized that we'd gone ahead and killed Maggie, even though the producer and executive producer had said, okay, we understand where you're coming from. And yes, we understand that rationale that if we go on an 8-week journey with PJ to find out who killed Maggie Doyle, that will keep the show going past Lisa McCune's exit. But even though all of that had happened, I still caught the blame for it. Now, we had 2 or 3 things happening at the time. I could see the end point for Len Murphy.
Yeah.
And I needed to have a hook to get rid of Len Murphy. We knew that the men in prison was not going to sustain for very much longer. Incidentally, and that was because one of them had broken out of solitary. Now, the whole rationale for the 3 men going into prison, I can knock over 2 birds with 1 stone here, because a couple of people mentioned that the male prisoners was the worst story ever. That was based on true fact of male prison catching fire in a state in America, and they had to transfer some of the prisoners to other male prisons, and when they ran out of space, some went to a women's prison, and excuse me, I've got hiccups from drinking fizzy water, and they put them in solitary confinement. They put them in a wing and they locked the wing off and they put them in solitary confinement. Nowadays, of course, over half the prisons are both sexes. They're multi-gender.
Yeah.
Over half the prisons in the world are multi-gender, men and women together. So those people who say they wouldn't put men in a women's prison, yes, they did. Not in Australia, but yes, they did.
Overseas.
And the second thing is that it was part of the story that they never be allowed to mix with the women, that they be kept in solitary confinement. Well, as you can imagine, you can only do so much story of a screw going to the isolation wing,
yeah,
and interacting with the men, and then she comes out again. And you're keeping it a secret from the women. Yeah, okay, but for how long can you keep that going? What? So we were faced with 3 different things. Judy McBurney, I think it might have been her first bout with cancer, poor lovely lady. But Judy McBurney had to leave. I wanted, for reasons which we've gone over in, maybe not in 3, it's maybe in 4, which people will have seen by the time they see this one. There were various reasons why I thought Len Murphy was pulling focus from the freak, and we couldn't have that because the freak was our antagonist. We had a top dog and we had a bent screw.
And just on that, he actually did do that, because I started forgetting, like, I loved Len. And I started forgetting about it.
A lot of people love Len. So they say, oh, terrible story, writing Len out. No, it's not. You've got to look at the show in its entire context.
Yeah.
And all the decisions that are made are for the good in the show.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, if Pixie's going to leave, I know a lot of people would have loved Pixie to have just left and lived happily ever after, because she was lovely. What would Pixie have done in reality? This is where I say the viewers should not confuse actors with characters, but writers have to believe that characters are real. What would Pixie have done if she had just been released and gone off to live her life? Well, what do you think she would have done?
She would have got married 10 times.
She would have got married again and again and again and come back to prison.
Yeah.
And we couldn't just repeat that story. So we needed something, again, like saying B is dead. We needed something which drew the curtain on Pixie completely. And also, as I said to someone who said, why would you do something so terrible to such a lovely character? Well, rape happens to women every single day of our lifetimes somewhere. And most of those women are good, innocent women who do not ask to be raped. And that was the point I was trying to make. I wanted people to cry their eyes out at Pixie's leaving. And that's what the fact that people did and were shocked and horrified and heartbroken and cried, that doesn't make it a bad story. That makes it a great story. Yeah. 40 years later, people still get emotional about Pixie being raped and going crazy. Yeah, that's a great story. That's not a bad story. So you can have stories that you don't like because that's not what you wanted to happen. You wanted something different to happen, but that does not make it a bad story. And the Pixie being raped story is a great story. It's a story that speaks to every single woman who's ever been sexually assaulted. And I haven't been raped, but I have been sexually assaulted, as you will read in the upcoming Dirty Laundry, My Life in Soap.
Yes.
We don't ask for it. We don't know what to do with it. Half the time we don't tell anybody about it, as she didn't. She was traumatized. She didn't say, no, it's not him, it's Frank. You know, she was so traumatized. This is a girl who wouldn't sleep with a man until she married him. And so she's in prison because she married every single guy she ever liked. You know, the worst trauma in the world would be for her to be raped. She would lose her mind. So I maintain, I get quite angry with fans, and I know I shouldn't do because you are all perfectly entitled to think what you want to think. But I would ask you with this explanation to go back and re-look at that Pixie story and take everything I've said on board and think it through again. You cannot just judge a story on a one-dimensional level because it either resonates with you or it doesn't, or it upsets you, so therefore it's a bad story.
It's conflicting though, because I will bring up something quickly. The Sons of Anarchy. Have you seen all those episodes?
No, I saw half of one, and I thought I really don't want to know about bikers. So
all right, well, I love it. I think it's a great show. Anyway, one of the major characters who was the head of the club for like 5 seasons. So he was the head guy, ran everything. He turned and did deals and did things the wrong way. So his name was Clay. He was played by Ron Perlman. Anyway,
I love Ron Perlman.
Ron Perlman's great.
Yeah.
Anyway, his stepson was the guy, Charlie Hunnam, that took over the club. But what happened was they put Ron Perlman in jail in the show. And I'm like, okay, so this is his ending. This can't be his ending, just going to jail. No, what happened? They broke him out. The club broke him out. He thought everything was okay. Then they killed him. The club killed him. He had to go. I didn't want him to go. I thought, no, I can't watch this show after that. But I did, but I knew he had to go. He did have to go. And it conflicts you, you know, the story.
Because we have to remember that television drama, and in particular something like Prisoner, is escapist entertainment.
Yes.
You know, it takes you out of yourself. It takes you somewhere where you think, oh, good, thank Christ that's not me, if it's in prison, for example. And so when it goes against your expectations, I hate to say this, but it's partly ego on the viewer's part. I wanted it to end this way. Yeah. I would have liked to see this. Not, well, in the greater context of the show, in order for the show to keep going. Yeah. Can you imagine Ron Perlman out and he and Charlie Hunnam fighting over, you might have got 6 good episodes out of it, but you would have had to kill him in the finish anyway.
Yeah, but I knew he had to. It's like the thought of him just going to jail and that's it, I thought, no, that can't work either. And then the thought of killing him, I don't want him to die, but he had to. So I knew that was the story.
That's the difference between fairy tales, and I mean, some series and some films are fairy tales, and they have fairy tale endings,
Yeah.
and that's why fairy tales end with "and they lived happily ever
The
after."
Prisoner wasn't a fairy tale.
But that wasn't a fairy tale.
And I loved
Prisoner-
the ending for Pixie. I loved the ending.
Did
I
you?
thought it was perfect.
Well, I'm glad you did, but I know that most people didn't, and most people think it was a bad story. It was a freaking great story. If you are talking about a story more than 40 odd years after it happened,
Exactly.
it's a great story.
Definitely.
So, but there are stories which are so satisfying to everyone that you know instantly they are a great story. And the interesting thing for me, looking at the things that people said were great stories, and here I must explain to viewers the difference between a story and an event. People say, oh, I loved the Reb Keane story. Well, Reb had probably 30 or 40 different stories during her stay in prison. What you mean is you love the Reb Keane character. Or people will say, oh, I love the Freak and Bee. I love their story. They had dozens and dozens of stories between them, and each one was resolved. A story is not a character. You have to differentiate between characters and stories. Now, there are people who hated the Joan Shane story because they wanted the freak, and that was on the page. Some 3 or 4 people mentioned that as one of the stories that was the worst story. That was because they had accepted Joan in a 2-dimensional way as always being bad. Now, we don't even really know our next door neighbours. None of us. We know them to say hi to. We've maybe been in their houses. We've even had them over.
Do you like to talk to your neighbour? I don't like talking to neighbours.
We don't know our parents. We usually find out after they died secrets about our parents. We had no idea about when they were alive. So to assume that all Joan Ferguson was a bitter and twisted, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable, so if you lose me, it'll only be temporary. People had accepted Joan as this person who they saw only in a prison and who only did these types of things. And I wanted to show nobody is bad all the time. Nobody is good all the time. Nobody is angry all the time. Nobody is forgiving all the time. And I wanted to show different dimensions to Joan. Take the uniform off Joan, put her outside, and that's why I was not in favor of her turning 100% evil. I would not have allowed her to do that, because she had reasons why she hated people who did drugs, and why she hated people who broke the law. That was part of her upbringing. But she was also multidimensional, and she was capable of liking animals, and she was capable of liking a kid that looked up to her, and she was capable of falling in love even when someone was using her, and she was capable of being in awe of her father, who had controlled her all of her life. And so that is why we gave her those stories. And again, I would say they're not bad stories. You might not like them.
Speaking of a story with the freak being nice, there was also Mark Lambert wrote, "Hi Coral, I like storylines you created which show another side of Joan, her sympathy and compassion for her neighbour who ends up inside and ultimately commits suicide, and looking out for her daughter, taking her to the zoo, as well as her relationship with her niece and father, and of course her dog and Shane. Along with Maggie's brilliant acting, it showed she was much more than a 2-dimensional character than she could be. I also like some of the latest stories you wrote for B towards the end, which showed she had a bit more in depth, particularly after she killed Nora. So there was also that storyline of Joan taking the young girl to the zoo, and another
Now,
side.
that's a person who is open-minded. And thank you for those comments, by the way, because that's exactly what we were trying to do. But there are people who want black and white, and they don't want shades of grey, and they don't want colours. They want their palette in black and white. And the fact that we tried to fill in, I call it dressing. We tried to put extra clothes on some of the characters which were fairly naked, and they were either this or they were that. We tried to dress them. I don't wear the same thing in fact, today I thought, what will I put on? Because I don't want to wear anything I've worn before. And when you put on different clothes, you react slightly differently because you feel more comfortable or less comfortable. When you put on a different aspect of your personality, and we all are multifaceted people, and people will say, I've had people say to me, I did a year of lecturing at university. At the time that my book, Big Screen, Small Screen, a book on screenwriting came out, they asked me, would I do a lecture? And I said, well, one lecture won't really do it. So Bond University asked me would I do an entire term as an adjunct professor and teach the screenwriting class. And there were people who said, oh, you're so fascinating to listen to. I could listen to you for hours. And there were other people who said, we'd heard you're a total bitch. And I said, well, I am. They said, oh, but you come across as this Earth Mother type. And I said, well, I am. And they said, oh, but you can't be both. I said, of course I can. Of course I can be both. Depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
Depending on what day they meet me. Depending on what mood I'm in. Depending on what's going on, as I spoke in the last, maybe they will have seen it by now, in the last Soapbox. Depending on what I was going through, I think it was number 3 actually, what I was going through in my life.
Oh, with the Maggie Bev Baker storyline, yes.
Yeah, depending on when you meet me, and we all make snap judgments about people the second we meet them. So there were some people who saw Joan as this nasty, evil lesbian who was out to, get prisoners. And they never moved on from that. They never were able to expand their horizons. And to a large degree, boy, I'm going to get flack for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The first couple of 100 episodes of Prisoner were written for couch potatoes who just wanted simple drama. Oh yeah, it's a women's prison. They're going to beat each other up. We're going to see women fight each other. And that's what a lot of viewers call the golden age. Once we got to the late 200s, right through to the mid 500s, this is what academics, and believe it or not, academics get their doctorates writing theses about Prisoner.
Oh, really?
And yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've actually been interviewed by several of them who have done their theses for their doctorate in media sciences and whatever on Prisoner.
Wow.
They call that period from the late 200s to the mid 500s, they call that the golden age of Prisoner, because all of a sudden I wanted to know, when I came in and took over, the previous story editor was not, as many people think, Denise Morgan.
Yep.
She was head writer and part creator of the series, but the story, head storyliner, as it was called in those days, was a bloke called Dave Worthington. Now, Dave Worthington's way of telling stories, and I love him dearly, but I have this theory, and I've said it when I've spoken at quite a few screenwriter conferences around the world. When you tell a story, men want to know what, women want to know why.
Yeah.
Men want to know, so what happens? Oh, right, they rob the bank. Oh, shit, do they get away with it? How does that go down? You know, what happens after that? Women want to know, why did they rob the bank?
Yeah, what's the reason?
Why is so-and-so so upset with so-and-so? Why is this? So men want to know what, women want to know why. They're two entirely different types of storytelling. The first couple of 100 episodes of Prisoner were largely about what, even when it was about Bea killing her husband because of her daughter, etc. It was still what. It was not about what was going on in her head and the grief she was dealing with, etc. It was all about she did this and then she got charged and then she went to prison and then she had to bash so-and-so to show she wasn't going to take any shit and so and so and so and so. So people who, and this is why I said it's largely men, and somebody pulled me up about this, but this is simply a fact. It is largely men who loved the first 200 episodes of Prisoner, because there was a show which was all about women, but it was geared for them. It was violent. It was about women doing stuff, doing shit that men do. It was about them making booze, and it was about them beating each other up, and it was about them, you know, illegal betting, and it was about all of that shit that men do, but they had never seen women do on screen before. Yes. It was revolutionary. I'm not decrying the first 200 episodes. They were still revolutionary. They had women doing things which we had only seen men do on television. Yeah. But it was all about the what. What did they do? Even when we heard bits of backstory, we didn't hear how the backstory affected the characters. From the late 200s on, the show became about why.
Why, yeah.
Why do people do these things? Why? You know, are they just evil, or did something happen to them? Or was it they just having a bad day? Or did what somebody else did to them cause them to do it to somebody else? And so it was a different way of telling stories. Now, you either expanded your thinking to embrace that, or you didn't. That is why there are these two camps of prisoner lovers. And unfortunately, they divided themselves into, strangely enough, for what reason I do not know, the Bea era and the coraldrouyn era. You know, like one's a character and the other one is a behind the scenes creative. So, you know, I didn't give Bea worse stories when I came in. I tried to give Bea better stories when I came in. I tried to expand that character. Now, whether that worked or not, I take the blame for it. Another of the stories which people think is a terrible story is the Zara Moonbeam story. Now, I can tell you that one of the key things that women in prison did in that stage, in the early 80s when Prisoner was made, they made Ouija boards. They would make a Ouija board and they would just, you know, scratch into it the letters of the alphabet and everything, and they would have seances in their cells. So it was perfectly legitimate for there to be someone who was trying to get at Bea, set up a situation where someone would say, oh, your daughter's trying to get in touch with you. The question of whether that's a good or bad story is how Bea reacted to it. Now, people didn't like Bea being fragile. Val Lehman didn't like Bea being fragile, vulnerable. She did not like it. She thought as top dog, she should be top dog. She should not show weakness. My feeling was everybody has weaknesses. If I knew what yours was and I pressed the button, it would set you off. And that was my feeling with the Zara Moonbeam story. Was it well executed and well written? Not especially. Not especially.
Really?
But
I thought it was a great storyline.
Well,
No, but no. The reason being,
excuse me, Matt. Excuse me.
you know, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of.
About Joan farting the national anthem, and you would think it was a great story.
No,
because
no. Can I tell you why? The thing is, I liked about it was that Prisoner was always known for someone getting bashed up, killed, strung up, hung. That showed a completely different way of torment. You know, it was tormenting me in a.
Yeah, it was torture.
That's what I liked about it.
Tortured.
Yeah, but she wasn't being bashed up. She wasn't being hurt.
No, she wasn't being bashed up. But as I said,
Mentally.
there are a lot of people who like the obvious. They don't want to think. A lot of people would say, you know, we don't watch television to think. You know, we get enough of that at work.
True, but how often can you see someone get bashed up on Prisoner or hung or shot or you know, that's what I like. It's something different.
Every other episode. So I wanted to do things that were psychological, things that would frighten someone. That's why I was surprised that no one had ever mentioned the blood in the shower head on Rem. No one had ever mentioned it. I read all through all of the pages, and I thought that is psychological warfare. And to me, that was a fantastic thing to do. I have to be honest and say I nicked it from an old film called Carrie, in which they set her up to become the prom queen. She's the weirdest girl in school and they hate her, but they don't realize that she has telekinetic powers. And they set her up to be crowned the prom queen on the night of the school dance, and they empty a bucket of pig's blood all over her. And she goes berserk, and her telekinetic powers kick in, and she just destroys the entire school and the people and everything in it. It's a horror movie from the 70s, and it's well worth a look. I think it's a Stephen King story.
I'll check it out. Yeah.
But to me, that was, you know, all right, it was payback. But I could not see Judy grabbing Reb and beating the living shit out of her as payback. Yeah. So a different way to pay someone back is to absolutely freak them out.
Definitely.
And to have Debbie ostensibly getting in touch with B is a freak out moment. And to have blood pouring out of a shower head all over you is a freak out moment. So I am not as in the freak out moments, but not to do with the freak, but just freak out moments. And I loved freak out moments. I thought that was much cleverer than just bashing somebody. Yeah. But there are a whole heap of people who can't think beyond. You're either a goodie or a baddie, a black hat or a white hat, and you're either a nice to people or you bash people.
Yeah.
And those people, you know, they love those first 200 episodes. And that's their right. That's what they wanted from the show. And that's what they got. But I wouldn't have taken the job if I'd had to keep the show on like that. If I'd had to do it the way it was done.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't have been interested.
Yeah.
What interested me was what goes on when you are forced, because I don't get on terribly well with women. I get on much better with men, because most men can actually be bossed around quite easily by a woman, and you may have figured out that I'm quite bossy. Get your fingers out of your mouth, Matt.
One thing I do want to ask is, when you're writing stories, did you ever think of like an actress that came to mind when you were writing a story?
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very often I would think of an actress who came to mind. And quite often, I think I told you that initially for Rita Connors, Rhonda Birchmore came to mind. And she would have been a very different Rita. She would still have been a bikie and bash, but she would have been funny with it. That's how she would have got away with it. She would have been funny with it. And sometimes there were actresses who I thought, oh God, I would love to have that person, but we'd use them for something else. And therefore we couldn't. You know, Maggie Miller, I would have loved to have had a character for Maggie Miller. I had Diane Craig in mind when I wrote Anita Selby. I actually had Diane Craig in mind, because by that time I had already done the film Ginger Meggs. This was when I was still acting. And I'd already played Mrs. Meggs, and opposite me playing Mr. Meggs, of course, was Gary MacDonald, who is, have you shown your daughter Ginger Meggs yet? And said, that's the lady who
I should actually, yeah.
Yeah,
No.
you bloody should. But so I met Di, and I knew what kind of a person she was. Had we not, my first choice for Anita Selby would have been Julia Blake. But we had Julia Blake play a couple of characters, one of which was a very important long-running character.
Yeah.
So I had to go for a younger nun, and Diane Craig was the choice there. But there are stories which people universally love, no matter which era they're from. And really interesting, and I was talking to my daughter Kelly just this morning, and the stories which came up the most often as favourites, you might have some of the names of some of the people who've mentioned in there, are the Kate Peterson.
Yes, I was going to bring that up.
Peterson going mad. I mean, it's only one of the stories about Kate Peterson, but it's the one everybody talks about. And Judy's euthanasia of Hazel. They're the two that come up. Interestingly, they're my favourite stories.
I was going to ask you, were they your favourite stories to write?
They were my two favourite stories of all the stories I did. And I don't know if I've mentioned this on a previous one, because for those of you that don't know, Matt and I don't do these every day and then store them. We sometimes go weeks and weeks in between before we do them. So it's hard for me, unless I get a chance to rewatch the one before, and sometimes that hasn't dropped yet. I can't remember, because I'm a silly old bag, what I said in previous episodes. But the Judy killing Hazel story, I used to write longhand, and my partner used to type, because he taught himself to type. He used to type up my scripts. And I sat at the dining room table sobbing my heart out. And my kids didn't know what was wrong. My partner didn't know what was wrong. And finally, you know, they were trying to placate me, and I was shrugging them off and saying, no, don't. And finally they said, what is wrong? What has happened? What is wrong? And I said, Judy just killed Hazel. That's how much I believed those characters were real.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were a fan and I believed that, you would need to get help for me, really. I'd cry at the time I watched it, but afterwards I'd say, well, it's only a television show, you know. But I believed so much in those people, and one of the things I loved always in storytelling was what we label moral dilemmas. You know, should I do this or should I do that? This is the right thing to do, but I will come off worse. This is the wrong thing to do, but I will come off better. I loved moral dilemmas, still do, you know, still whenever I'm writing anything, it's got a moral dilemma at its core. But we needed a story to put her back in prison, to put Judy back in prison. And to be honest, it was a very, very contentious story at the time, because we actually caused a lot of discussion about euthanasia, because we'd done it. No one had ever done it in a primetime show. No one.
Wow.
You know, and in fact, you know, lots of people had done bashings in primetime shows, but never with women. And then as it got more sophisticated and more complicated, we did more and more stories about, no one had ever done or ever has, I think, to this day, a story on sexual deprivation, which was I can't remember their surname story, but I remember Jill Forster played the woman who is in prison and, you know, is dying for a bit of nookie. So we had a conjugal rights suite set up. No one had ever done stories like that, because no one had ever acknowledged that women felt those things.
Yeah.
You know, and most of the people who were behind the scenes in Grundy's were gay. And really, although most of my male friends are gay and I love them dearly, but I don't expect deep and meaningful insight into how a female thinks from them. It just doesn't happen. So yeah, the Judy story was a very, very important story, and a lot of people don't know why, but it's the ultimate story of friendship. I will, because you can't do this for yourself, I will sacrifice my freedom to do something for my friend which needs to be done, and there is no one but me to do it. People don't know why they love that story, but it appeals to their better instincts inside. So when people say, oh, I hated that story, what a load of crap, I think you're not someone I want to talk to, know, have on my radar in any way, shape or form. And there are a few of them.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of them who post on these things, and I think, I'm not going to answer you because you are absolutely nothing in my life. If you don't understand that that story is an ultimate story of sacrifice and friendship, then you don't understand anything. And you probably have
when you watched that episode, did you go, yep, this is absolutely perfect, perfectly written, perfect storyline, perfectly acted? Like,
I did. I thought it was perfectly acted. I didn't think it was perfectly shot. I watched that scene again recently where Judy is brushing Hazel's hair, and Hazel grabs her hand and says, "You're going to do it, aren't you?"
Yeah.
And I thought that's absolutely the wrong shot to have. The shot was from this side of the bed, and Judy was in the background, and you didn't see either of them in close up. And we should have seen what it was costing Judy.
Yeah.
We should have seen, and we should have seen what it was costing Hazel, and we didn't. It was badly directed. I can't remember who directed it. Sorry, it was probably Steve Mann or Chris Adshead, or both of whom I love dearly, but it was not their finest hour. It was but time would have been against them too. Yeah. In a movie, that scene would have taken a day, 2 days to shoot that scene. So the shooting of it, I didn't think was good. I'd have to say I think the script was good because from memory, it was my script. So I'm not going to say it's shit. And I thought it was beautifully acted.
Yeah.
But I did think, I actually thought, that was the first time I actually thought of leaving Prisoner. And I can't remember. Do you remember what episode that was?
I can look it up. So you're going to leave at that time?
I actually thought to myself, I've said what I have to say about life and living and friendship, and I don't know that I've got anything else to say. I may as well quit.
Episode 399.
Really? So I'd only been there 100 plus X.
Wow. So that's where you were.
You see, to me, if you are a real writer, if you're a real storyteller, you have to have something to say. You don't just tell the what. That's why I'm so big on the why, because I want to have something to say. Yeah. And if you don't have something to say, shut up. And I wasn't sure that was the pinnacle of what I had to say, is that there are times when you cannot come first. There are bigger things than you. And friendship and loyalty is one of them. And sometimes you have to sacrifice yourself. And I reminded myself of that when I let myself get fired for writing the dreaded poem.
The famous poem.
I didn't write. I thought sometimes I've had my day, I've had my time, I've said things I wanted to say. The reason I held out about not doing Home and Away, and in the finish taking it only for the money, and then realizing when I took it for the money, I can't work unless I have something to say, and thus came about the Alf dying and before his time, because he wanted to die. And then the episode that I got the Writers' Award for, of what would happen to Summer Bay if Alf died prematurely. And I realized I still had things to say. But at that time, when Judy kills Hazel, I thought, that's the pinnacle of what I have to say.
Yeah.
And I'd never really believed, because I'd never had a female friend who I mean, I would have happily died for my kids and still would, even more so now because I've had my life. So if it was a case of, you know, take one of them at 50 or take me at 77, I'd say, take me, for Christ's sake, take me. I've had my life. They've still got so much to do. But I've never had a female friend who I would have been willing to say, I sacrifice my all, my whole future, to do what is right for my friend. And I'm actually getting quite emotional even rethinking about it now. But I felt it was such an important thing to say. And so, oh dear, Coral, it's 40 odd years ago. It's such an important thing to say that I am always thrilled when people say, that's my favorite story, because I realize they got it. Those people got it. You know, the people who think, oh, it was crap or rubbish or whatever, they just don't get it. And so I'm not talking to them.
No, it's an amazing story, because you see that, and then you see the future for Judy on top of that.
Well, Judy, life changes again. Judy knows she's going back to prison if she does this.
Yeah.
And unselfishly, she does it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And that's how much I love Judy. And I loved Belinda Davey as an actress. Yeah. But Belinda wanted to leave as well. Have you had Belinda Davey? Is she still alive? I don't.
Yeah, she's still just one of those ones that you just haven't been able to find. I found her children, but I haven't been able to get in contact.
All right. Well, I loved her. Yeah. And of course, I loved the character of Judy, but I also love Betty Bobbitt as a person. Yeah. So that to me, and that is why when people say, oh, Anne Phelan said publicly that, you know, Betty Bobbitt was getting more than her and she wanted the same amount as Betty Bobbitt. The Betty Bobbitt I know would never have told Anne Phelan she was getting more money than she was. Never. Yeah.
Did you ever go to one of Betty's famous dinner parties?
No, I didn't. We met each other on the set. We met each other in the office. We met each other. We crossed paths in cafes and things, but we didn't share a social life. Yet I considered her a friend. And I went to the Arts Centre not that long before she died. And I remember what I said to her, because her hair had gone pure white, absolutely pure white, and it was swept up. And I thought, I want my hair, sorry, I'm the other way. I want my hair to be like Betty Bobbitt. So I want it to go white and I'll sweep it up. And that's why I let it grow long. And then I had it cut between the last one and this one because it just got to the stage where I couldn't handle it anymore. But she was such a fabulous lady and I loved her dearly. And she was coming in to pick up tickets for a show at the Arts Centre. And I was there to do the review of it. It was the opening night. And I said to her, you're looking rather swish. And she turned and she looked at me, and it was probably 2 seconds before she recognized me. And she went, oh my God, Coral. And she just threw herself at me. And we hugged and hugged and hugged. Some people, when you meet them, you have to respect their space and stand back and realize that a hug is not going to be welcome. Yeah. But Betty and I are two of a kind. You got a hug whether you bloody wanted it or not. Yeah. You got hugged. Yeah. And we hugged each other like crazy, pretty much like as you saw in the picture, Lisa McCune and I did.
Actually, I've got to share that. I've got to share that on the Facebook page.
Oh yeah, by all means do. Yeah. By all means do.
Can we fit in a couple? Yeah, we're pushed for time, but I just want to fit in a couple more. Stuart Sutherland. Now, this is actually one that I agree with. Actually, the worst was Nora as top dog. The character never worked for me either way, and the way she was written out of the series never worked for me. The actress was great. I'm not knocking the actress, but I actually thought she was just a very underwhelming top dog for me too.
Look, to be perfectly honest, and you know, no disrespect to
Sonia, no,
Sonia Tallis for how she played her. Sonia was not an experienced actress. She had spent her early years as part of a folk duo called Sean and Sonia. And I think I have, if I haven't, I'll send you a copy of the picture to put up of her performing as one half of Sean and Sonia. They used to sing folk songs. Nora on paper was an extraordinarily complicated character whose rationale was there has to be another way other than violence. We just haven't discovered it yet. So let's look for it and find out what it is. There has to be another way, because I was probably going into my spiritual period at the time, because we can't just keep on beating the living shit out of people. Exactly. Sonia was not an experienced enough actress to convey that. And what happened was she came across as weak, whereas I had wanted a Sonia who was full of hurt and full of pain, and knew that she could get rid of that by bash, 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 or kill someone, or she was capable of doing that, but she was making a conscious choice. It was her own path to redemption, to find a way through all of her own pain by solving the problems without bashing everyone. That was the rationale behind the character. Sonia Tallis was not an experienced enough actress. If I could, I actually, I did say to Grundy's a couple of times, because I create all these characters, and by that time I had a say in casting. I mean, they ran it past me. These are the people we like, yay or nay. And if I said nay, they said nay. She was the best of the people they auditioned, but I knew that she wasn't right. And I actually said to them, if you would make me director of acting, because I create these characters, if you would make me director of acting and let me go on the floor before we shoot these key scenes and talk about the rationale behind the action. Because to be perfectly honest, and I don't mean anything disrespectful to Steve or even Kendall, poor darling, or Chris Adshead, or any of our regular directors. Yeah. They didn't know anything about acting. They knew nothing. They were camera pointers, and they didn't even try to direct the actors. So the actors were left pretty much to their own devices. This is what I'll do in this scene. Yeah. Which is why we got so many characters doing the same thing over and over and over again, because there wasn't a director to say, no, you did that last time. Let's try it from this angle. Let's come to it from a different angle in the thinking. There was no one to do that. And she was not an experienced enough actress to do that. It would have been a very different Nora if I'd been able to talk through certain scenes with her. On the paper, Nora was a really red hot, different kind of top dog. And the idea of having a council, it's pretty much like the jury system. The idea of having a council, well, it's not just what I say, it's how is it affecting all these people represent everyone in here, and how is your behavior affecting everyone in here? I still think was a good idea. Badly realized, but not a bad idea. But Stuart is absolutely right. She didn't work from the word go. I didn't kill her. She was killed just after I left. But I certainly wanted her out. Yeah. I wanted her out. I did.
Her most powerful scene, and we'll talk about the terrorist episodes in another episode. Yeah. Her most powerful scene, and as I said, I wasn't a fan of her, but that scene where in the terrorist episode, she was phenomenal. She was amazing. She was. Her acting was just like, it was like, whoa, where did all this come from?
It's like everything else. There's a very, very famous English actor called Dirk Bogarde, who, when he started out, he was just a pretty boy. And I think this is true of Chris Hemsworth and a few others, not Leonardo DiCaprio, because anyone who's seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape knows that even at 15, Leonardo DiCaprio was a stupendous actor.
Yeah.
But there are actors who are absolute shit. Dirk Bogarde, who in later life was an incredible actor, says, and people said to him, you know, how did your acting is now so good? And he said, well, you can't work in hundreds of films opposite really good actors without learning something, without getting better. And she was starting to get better as an actress. But by that time I'd said, oh, look, she's got to go.
Got to go.
She's just got to go, because I can't, you know, I can't keep telling stories which she doesn't have sufficient depth to get out of them what it is I'm trying to say. It means I end up saying nothing, and I don't want to do that. So, but in the case of Kate Peterson, which is everybody else's favourite.
Oh, everyone loves that story. Everyone.
Yeah. That was part me. Well, you know, I mean, it was my story, my character, so, you know, I can claim some rights to it. But this is a case, as you remember in the last one, I said more than any other character, Lou Siverson owns Lou Kelly, because she actually created that persona when there wasn't even you know, there was no backstory, there was no character breakdown on her, so much so that she made the impression on me. And I said, who the hell is that? Who's an extra? She should be up front. But in the case of Kate Peterson, we had Olivia Hamnet, who was a very, very fine stage actress. And as it turned out, a very, very fine television actress. And she understood that part. She came in and she said to me, how mad is she? Because she'd read the character breakdown. And I said, when we meet her, she's obsessive, but she's not mad. Yeah. She's on the borderline. She could be pushed over at any time. And I said, but when she is pushed over, it's full-blown, certifiable, put a straitjacket on her and take her off to the loony bin. But she must never, ever believe herself that she is mad, because if she believes she's mad, she's still sane enough to get better.
And that was so clever that you did that.
Well, I don't know, but I think I've told you, and we've run this, how that was when my grandmother went mad, and that was partially a physical thing, because she had, after the death of my grandfather, become an alcoholic and drunk herself to the stage where part of her brain was physically crumbling. I took from her the little, you know, and I use it's the clock. I've got this little clock in my head, and it goes tick, 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 and I can't stop it. It just keeps ticking, 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 you know, and I knew I was going to, and my grandmother at that stage, the police had to come. The police took her into custody, and they had what they call a Section 32, I think it was called, which was you are taken before a judge, and the judge decides whether you are
certified,
sound enough to make decisions for yourself. And I discussed this with Olivia and said, when she goes, she has been, so I said, so you've got to play her really subtly where she's obsessive. And she says some things which you say, oh, that's a bit crazy, but she mustn't be mad. But when she flips over the edge, there can be no sign that she is aware that she's gone crazy. So she can't be frightened by it, which is why she has that wonderful last line, have a lovely day. Yeah. As she leaves, you know, because, hey, I'm going somewhere, I'm going out. And, you know, but she must never show that she knows she's gone crazy, which is what makes it so horrifying for the audience and for the screws and for the other prisoners, etc., is to realize, not like Pixie, who was traumatized, but in time will regain her sanity. Yeah. This woman is stark, staring mad, and will wind up in a straitjacket.
I've never seen one negative about that storyline ever.
No, and it's it's one of my best storylines. So that and the euthanasia storyline are my two best storylines. I mean, I know I'm not a freaking idiot. I know when my stories are. Oh, yeah. The Jennifer Hartley and her grandmother story. It's a story. It's not, it's not so bad you want to turn the show off.
Well, Darren Sibley actually said Jenny Hartley and everything about her, I cringed at the sight of her. Possibly the most annoying character ever.
It was the wrong casting. It was a totally wrong casting. I mean, I think the grandmother was played by Aileen Britton, and the grandmother was terrific. It was that the girl who was cast to play Jenny Hartley, whose name I have conveniently forgotten,
Jenny Lovell.
so that I don't ever. Who was it?
Jenny Lovell. I thought that storyline again. I thought that storyline worked because there are. Did you ever see a movie called Flowers in the Attic?
Yes.
I mean,
yeah, I know there are people like that, but you don't want characters who you designate as being goodies, or you want the audience to think is good or is a goodie. You don't want them to think that person is so annoying I can't bloody watch it. Now, I'll tell you a piece of what I believe is miscasting, which I think up an entire story. And that was the casting of another name I try to forget. Kylie Foster was her name as Angel. She was, yeah. Now, it kind of worked, but again, Kylie Foster wasn't an intelligent enough actress or an experienced enough actress to play that kind of deviousness. And that Angel character was based on a film which you can still see on some of the, classic channels and things, called The Bad Seed.
Okay.
In which it was a film that actually started the whole conversation about nature or nurture. Are you taught to become a certain person, or are you born a certain way? And that was the story we were telling, was, is this person just naturally evil, or has she learned that from other people? Now, Kylie wasn't experienced, well, she was very young, God bless her, but she was not experienced enough, and she didn't play Angel as intelligent enough, because I had considered Angel would have to be pretty intelligent to come up with some of the devious, hideous things that she came up with. In the same way as I say Lexi would never have gone to a brothel when she escaped, because she knew that would be the first place people would look for her, baddies would look for her. She would have gone somewhere and hidden in somewhere like a library as a librarian's assistant, or, as a teacher's aide in a kindergarten, because no one would have ever suspected she would go there. Lexi was smart. Bobby was not particularly smart. Marlene was not particularly smart. Angel should have been super, super smart to come up with all these devious things that she did, because she was meant to be just plain evil. Yeah. And I did not believe that Kylie had that depth of acting experience to play her, and so I couldn't watch her on screen. I would have someone else watch her and report back to me whether or not it worked or not. Wow. I couldn't watch.
Wow. Did you ever like when you watched episodes back and think, they've wrecked my story, this has not worked?
Very frequently.
Yeah.
Frequently, and I mean there are. And they're little things which, and I totally accept that most people wouldn't notice them. I mean, when we had Mervyn in as the cook, he was very fastidious about his cooking. And I specified in the script a set of copper saucepans, which they're still very expensive. But at that time, they were, if you think like $1,000 back in the 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Back then, that's what it would have cost you for a good set of copper-based saucepans. And they gave him a set from bloody Rayco or from Kmart or somewhere. And I went off my head and I said, that wrecks the story. And they said, nobody will know the difference. But the thing is, I knew the difference.
Yeah.
I knew, and he knew the difference. And and that was when I threw one of my tantrums. I threw one of my tantrums over Anita Selby having a paperback Good News Bible, which isn't even a Catholic Bible. It's you know, don't get me started on it. That was another, you know, it was props. I've had this conversation with Ken before because props screwed me over so many times. And I know they did the best they could, but they just screwed me over.
Yeah.
They just, you know, it was even the things in Ruth Ballinger's cell, you know, which were all slightly, the dressing of it was all slightly tacking. She had money to burn. And she would have just said, "It's $5,000. Get me the best bed, the best bed head, the best lamp. Get me this. Get me. I want some Malik crystal on the side. I want." And it was like, "Oh no, we'll give her a frilly lampshade." Ruth Ballinger would not have had a frilly freaking lampshade. She just would not. So sometimes it's totally out of your hand. It's not that I didn't do bad stories. I did do some bad stories, but more often than not, they were good stories that
I think it was one of your worst stories that you personally think.
Oh God, throw some bad stories at me.
Well,
because I tend not to remember the bad ones.
Paul Ward just said, Phil Cleary, just why? That's what he's.
Oh, look, again, that actor was a wimp. He wasn't now, you imagine that story because it was meant to be that all the women went gaga over him, and so did Meg. It's like everybody went, holy shit. If you'd had, at the time, 40 years ago, someone like James Spader or Robert Downey Jr. at the time, or 10 years ago, Chris Hemsworth, you know, if you'd had an absolute hunk who was also smart, who was nice to the women, and they misunderstood it, because I had lots of plans for the story that I later used with Angie in Home and Away, of the woman, of the teacher ripping her thing and saying he tried to rape me, was going to be a story for Phil Cleary.
Okay.
It was going to be, that's when I first thought of that story. And it was going to be, I think it was going to be Reb or someone like that, who got the hots for him and he didn't reciprocate. Or he said, look, I know, but you've been nice to me. You've given me all these signs. Yeah, but you've misread them. You know, I'm nice to everybody. Ask so-and-so, ask so-and-so. I'm nice to all of them. No, but it was me. Because she wanted him to love her so badly that then tears her uniform open and screams, help, help, I'm being attacked. And he's standing there not knowing what's happened. The actor was such a wet flannel that I just said, go, just get rid of him. So again, had that story been realized the way we wanted it to be with the casting, but there were a limited amount of actors, and there were a lot of actors who would not do Prisoner.
Oh, really?
There are a lot of actors and actresses who would not do Prisoner because they were afraid of being stuck in a rut or typecast. That's why people, you know, like Maggie Miller left after a limited time, because I've got to do other things. I can't just have this on my resume. Now, if you're really smart, you need to do very little else, and you can make a living for the rest of your life on the fact that you starred in Prisoner. But if you are someone who is looking to have a wide variety of credits to their name, you can't be stuck for longer than 4 to 6 months in something like Prisoner. That is why we had great people who wouldn't stay. And Annie Phelan knew that. And that is why she asked for money. I remember saying to her afterwards, Because somebody once said to me, you deliberately wrote that poem because you wanted to be, subconsciously, you wanted to be fired. And I've thought about it many, many times since, and probably subconsciously, I did want to be fired. I could not walk away from the money I was making and the work I was doing. But I knew it was killing me, and I also knew it was going to be hard for me to get another show after I'd done Prisoner. Now, I suggested to Annie Phelan, maybe some 10 years after she left Prisoner, you engineered your own demise, didn't you? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, it wasn't about the money or the helicopter or any of that stuff, was it? You had just had enough and knew you'd got to move on. And of course she did. She moved on to things like Something in the Air, which Kelly, my daughter, was a story editor on that show and played someone totally, totally different. She'd been there as long as she could afford to be there as an actress and still keep her credibility. And it's a shame that although Val left, and Val left of her own volition, she wasn't pushed, but she still makes it sound like she was a victim. They got rid of me and the show was never any good afterwards. That was the right time for her to leave and move on and do other things. That was the right time. Yeah. If she'd stayed on any longer, somebody actually wrote that in response to the last Soapbox, I think. I said, I actually believe that she left at the right time. She could not have continued. The show would not have kept on. And that's the same with Lisa McCune. She now totally accepts I had to kill her.
Yeah.
There was no way for her to leave because people would have been waiting for her to come back. She was the most popular and still is to this day. Forget about Prisoner fans. She is the most popular actress ever on Australian television. She's won more awards.
Yeah, she is.
She is the most popular actress ever on Australian television, and I killed her. I got death threats after that.
Oh, geez. Oh. Wow.
I got death threats and I got fired. But it was the right decision, and the show went on for another 2 or 3 years afterwards. Had she not died, if Maggie Doyle and Blue Heelers had gone off with someone, the show would have ended at the end of that year.
They all move to Queensland on these shows, don't they?
Yeah. Because nobody ever wants to go to Queensland to film them. That's why. But I hope that gives answers to a lot of the people, because I know you've got to wind up now, Matt.
Oh, that's okay. I'll just go a little bit longer. I do want to go off topic because I want to actually please one of my fans, Lamont Bradford. If you're watching, better switch off now because I am going to go off topic. Because he said I make him sick because I go off topic. So
yeah, I know, but he's also the one that bagged me mercilessly and said the show was never any good with the.
I know. I'd love to know who he is, but anyway, we just acknowledge him. You brought up a jury before. What do you think of the jury system in the sense that obviously in a lot of American shows, you see the jury sitting there and they're listening to all the facts and the lawyers and everything. And then a lawyer brings up something they're not supposed to. And the judge says, you need to
disregard that.
Disregard that. How do you disregard something like that? You can't.
You can't. And I think the interesting thing is, in a way, is that the kangaroo court system, if you want to call the council that, because it was like a kangaroo court, is more honest because they all know each other and they know all the facts. Whereas when you have a trial in the criminal system, you're not allowed to bring up a person's prior convictions, for example. And many times you'll have a jury say, oh, if I had known before I went into the jury room that this person had raped 4 other women, you know, I would not have found him not guilty. You're only allowed to go on the evidence presented in that case. And that is unfair. That works in the favor of the accused.
Yes.
And so I had mixed feelings, but in a democracy, there isn't any other way that you, if I were, because I'm a better actress now than I was when I was doing things like Arcade, if I was ever to commit a crime, I think I would choose to be tried by a judge only, not a jury system, because I am a very contentious person. As I said earlier, some people will say, oh God, she's wonderful. And others will say, I can't stand that bitch. She goes on and on and on. And she talks about herself all the time. Well, yeah, because that's where I'm talking about characters and stories I created. What do you want me to do? Say one did this rather than say I did it? But I probably would say just one judge. I've only got to sway the judge. That's all I got to do. Whereas if there's 12 people, 10 of them might hate me and 2 of them might love me. And even my acting might be good enough to persuade them.
Yeah.
I once got I shouldn't say this because I might get charged with something, but I'm not even going to say where it was or what it was. But I once got a friend a huge settlement from an accident they had by taking an oath and going into the witness box and lying my ass off and even turning on the tears about how much effect it had had on them.
We won't
Did
say.
you ever witness, Miss Kelly? I was called Miss Kelly at the time. Did you ever witness, Miss Kelly, any after effects on, oh God, Your Honour, this is my friend, and we couldn't even go out for lunch or anything anymore. And I could see she was in pain. There was nothing I could do to relieve the pain. I wish I could have. If I could have, I would have done anything to take the pain away from her. But she was in agony for every day for years and years. She got several 100,000 and bought a house.
Sounds like a show. But no, going back to that jury, I agree. It's like if you're listening to a case and the lawyer brings up, the defense or the prosecution bring up, well, he's been charged, he's been a pedophile. He raped a 10-year-old girl.
Particularly in the case of pedophiles.
How can you take that out of your head after the judge says you can't talk about that?
Disregard that once, even if it's stricken from the record, struck from the record?
Struck from the record, yes.
Even if it's struck from the record, they can't unhear it. And whether they know it or not, it influences how they feel.
It does.
You can't unhear something you've heard.
And the jury system is so big over there. I mean, they even have the jury selection where they're interviewing, and
I know. They spend a week or more choosing a jury. So to make sure that they choose jurors who they want on there rather than, just any old sort.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen here, does it?
Opinions? Well, of course you've formed an opinion. Unless you've been living in a freaking cave or you're cretinous. And either way, if that's the case, you shouldn't be on a jury in the first place. If you've been living in a cave or you're cretinous. If you're a normal person, yes, you've formed an opinion. So probably 11 of those 12 people are going to say, oh, no, I haven't formed any opinion. Are lying.
Yes, that's true.
So,
before we wrap up, so another favourite storyline, one Matthew Northcote brought up was the Brandy / Laura storyline.
Oh, Peterson is an actress who I'm still friends with.
Yeah, she's great.
Rosalind Gentle is, she was fresh out of NIDA. She is, I don't get much kudos from actors or actresses. Most of the time they don't even know it's me that created their character. But in the case of Ros, she, when I asked to befriend her on Facebook, she sent me a message saying, if it wasn't for you, I would probably have been just another wannabe actress working in a coffee shop. She said, for me to have that role as my first television role was a gift, an absolute gift. And she pulled out all the stops and she did a brilliant, brilliant job with it. Brilliant. But for those who have never seen it, you need to, there's a very, very good series, I think it's Foxtel, but it might be Netflix, called, oh, have you watched The Social Distance yet? The Social Dilemma?
Not yet, because you know what's happened? My partner put on a show last week or the week before called Billions, and I can't stop watching it. There's 8 seasons of it, and I'm totally hooked. I cannot.
Well, there is a Foxtel series called The Last Great Movie Stars, which is about Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. And if you can, all of the Prisoner fans who love the Brandy Laura storyline, if you can see it, see the 3 Faces of Eve, because it was the 3 Faces of Eve which inspired the Brandy Laura story. And the fact that, and there is a documentary on this on Netflix, that it's called Identification Dysmorphic Disorder or something now, but it used to be called multiple personality disorder back in the day. And people used to think that it was schizophrenia. It's nothing to do with schizophrenia, nor are the symptoms even remarkably similar. But they have found that a trauma can split a person into different beings that have different elements. It's like instead of one 3-dimensional person, you have 3 one-dimensional characters. And it is an actual thing, although a lot of people did not believe it for a very long time. And I happened to love that film to death and think, oh God, I'd love to have a chance to do that story. So it was another story that I wanted to do. And what I had to say in that was, people are not just what you see.
Yeah.
People are more complex than that. There can be 3 entirely different people. And if you met Brandy, you wouldn't know Laura existed. Or if you met Laura, you wouldn't know Brandy existed. Because people are complex. There are a lot of things. So it was one of my early, I'm going to get on my soapbox and say something stories. Ros Gentles was fabulous. She realized it perfectly. And Brian Williams also was fantastic in it.
The scene in The Office, yeah, wow.
Yeah. I can confess now, many years down the track, probably 40, 50, maybe 50, 55 years ago, 50 years, and no, 55, I don't know that my kids were born. I so had the hots for Brian Williams.
Oh, really?
So fancy Brian Williams, so,
you would have liked to have been sitting on Dr. Wiseman's couch.
I would have been quite happy sitting on Dr. Wiseman's lap, let alone Dr. Wiseman's chair or couch. So the Brandy Laura story was one which I watched very closely, because I said, oh, I'll just look at the offline edit, because I was wanting to perv on Brian. And instead I thought, she's fantastic. She's just absolutely phenomenal.
It was an amazing scene.
She was phenomenal. She convinced me that Brandy and Laura were 2 entirely different people. And a case had come up in America where someone had said, well, so-and-so, which was the alternate personality, has confessed to the murder, but they won't come out in the courtroom. And so we can't try this person because they didn't do it.
Ah, wow.
They were the body that did it, but they were not the person who did it. And the person who did it doesn't have a body, is in that body, and refuses to come out.
That was like, did you ever see the movie Primal Fear with Richard Gere and Edward Norton?
Absolutely. Good film.
That hooked me right to the end. I thought that was all true, and then at the end he just turned. He said,
exactly. How do you know I mean, that's the question, is how do you know? People are many things. Nobody is one-dimensional. And much as I loved Frankie, because she was only there for the 8 weeks, the 16 Fs, that's what she was contracted for. She based, this is what I have to do as this character. But if Frankie Doyle had stayed in prison, Carol Burns, who was also a very fine actress, would have said, it's one-dimensional. I can't keep doing this. I can't smash up the rec room again. I can't bash up, you know, give me something to do. Give me something which shows I have a mind and I think about things.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of actresses only stayed for a very short time, because they said, yeah, I can do that, but I can sustain it for 3 months, 6 months, but I can't do that year in, year out, because you'd either have to be lazy or a pretty ordinary actor to say, well, I've locked into this now, and so that's what I'm going to keep doing.
But also people like Louise Siverson and Val Lehman and actresses that had heavy parts like that said it can be so emotionally draining and tiring.
Well, I don't know if you've seen any of Lou Siverson's work since, but it just goes to show how wonderful she is as an actress, because none of her roles has been. One thing I watched her in a series, she played a judge, and she was terribly well spoken and rather jaded.
Yeah.
And a little bit, you know, don't pull that trick in my courtroom if you don't mind. And I thought, God, she's a good actress, this woman, because you know, as you do with Annie Phelan, you know, you watch her following Myra, and you'd watch her in Something in the Air and say, geez, she's good. Yeah. She's a good actress. And if you're lucky enough to have those, you have to accept that by and large, you're not going to have it forever. There are very few really good actors or actresses that are there at the start of a series that are still there at the end of a series, a long-running series. Very, very few. Because if the character doesn't change and grow, the actor is stuck playing the same beat. We call it a beat. The actor is stuck playing the same beat over and over and over again. And that was why, you know, I said, let's do the Zara Moonbeam story. Let's do the Spirit story. Let's show that this character is really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And, definitely. You know, people say stupid story as if that would happen, as if B would be sucked in by it. Yes, she would. If she had played it like she would, like she was desperate because she felt guilty over failing Debbie, and she wanted to know that, you know, Debbie did still survive somewhere in the ether, and she wanted validation that it was okay. That
you know what also backed up that story was, and I also liked how she was tired. B was tired at that time. She'd had enough. Yeah. Nola was pushing the drugs.
Yeah.
The girls were wanting the drugs.
She was
over
it. She, the character of B was starting to think, how long can I keep doing this?
Yeah. Yeah.
How long can I keep, you know?
She seeked out that.
Yeah.
Zara. You know?
Yeah, so again, I maintain it was a good story. It wasn't terribly well executed or terribly well acted, but for people to say that would never happen, my answer to that is this. I have a saying, and I wrote this saying myself, but I've now seen it, somebody nicked it off me on the net, and it's now on greeting cards and things. In a universe of infinite possibility, I refuse to indulge in limited probability.
Yes. I love that.
Anything is possible. Is it probable? Maybe not, but I don't want to go where the probable is. I want to go where the possible is. And I don't think, I'm waiting for someone to correct me, but I don't think that any story I ever did was impossible. A lot of them were improbable, but not impossible. They could have happened. And if it could have happened in the world of drama, which is heightened reality, it did happen.
Yes.
That's a good point to leave.
No, it's true. It's true. And it's, you know, it's like The Sopranos. The Sopranos, yeah. I remember when the last episode I watched, it was in 2003, and the screen went black, and we all thought the electricity went out. That was the ending. We were like, what's going on here? And then David Chase was interviewed recently on a podcast, and he said it allows you to think many different things. It's like when a book ends, the book ends, and then you think.
That is the other thing that people that say, and I mean, I wasn't there, so I won't comment on how it ended. But when people say, oh, Prisoners should have gone on another year, or it should have ended like this, or B should have come back to life and done this, that's not how life works.
Yeah.
Life doesn't work that way. And what you have to remember is that when you are watching an episode of any television story, there are other things. When the characters are off screen, their lives are going on. They're doing other things.
Yes.
And when it finally ends and the credits come up, life goes on.
Yeah.
Always something is happening. You don't always get to see all of what's happening. And you out there don't always get to see all of what's happening. And that's why you want to write your own endings. But life goes on. There is no ending. Somewhere in the world, Prisoner is still continuing. They're dead and they're all young people in there now. But it's not Wentworth.
Yeah.
It's still Prisoner.
Yeah.
It's still, life is still continuing.
That's true.
Okay, young Matt.
All right. Enjoy your weekend.